Okay, we are ready to start. Today we have Derek and Doreen presenting to us on some psychometric work. Thank you all for being here. Whenever you're ready, you should be able to share the screen and begin. We are already live streaming.
Okay, I'll share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Doreen Derrick. I'm together with Doreen Derrick will present to you. Sorry, I'm just minimizing. Okay, so present to you measure development. This is a call guide. This is our presentation outline. So in research, there are various variables such as direct variables that can be observed directly or seen or tangible, like blood pressure, blood volume, or weight. But there are also variables such as those that cannot be measured directly, or they're not tangible, or they need to be observed through multiple questions. This is because they're due to the behavior or feelings of a person, and these variables are called latent variables. For example, of depression. So most often, we tend to ask questions related to depression, and these questions could be like, do you often feel sad or do you feel blue? Now, these questions do not directly give you the answer that you require because they don't give you exact measure of depression. So a person might give you an answer like, yes, I feel sad, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I have depression at the moment, or this person might have depression. Now, this person might be going through different circumstances in life. And also, according to DSM-5, depression is more about feeling sad. So there are multiple ways we need to come up to measure certain variables, which are latent variable, in order to get that measure. Now, with depression, there is a tool called PHQ-9, which is a set of 9 items. And in each item, there are 4 questions, ranging from not at all coded 0 and nearly every day coded 3. So at the end of the day, these 9 items are being summed up, and then we get the PHQ-9 score, which is actually related to depression, or it measures depression. Or we can measure depression by summing up all the 9 items and then weighing it by weighing it using factor analysis. So we can get depression in that way. Now, why do we need a new or adapted scale? So as I said before, these variables actually cannot be measured by a single question. So we need multiple questions that are related to this construct. And sometimes there is no existing scale that is available to measure this construct. That is one reason why we need a new or adapted scale. Secondly, we might have existing scale, but this scale is not validated for the targeted population. Third, this scale might be validated. I mean, like, it's available, but it's not culturally validated and needs to be translated and back translated. For example, I can give an example. In most questions or most tools are in English language, but for we who are in Tanzania, we use Kiswahili. I know most of you are learning Kiswahili, so I think this example will be very valid. So when you want to measure, let's say, alcohol-related problems, question like, do people think less of people with alcohol-related problems? Or do you think less of people with alcohol-related problems? So thinking less is not direct, and you might get an answer, but it's not direct to what you're trying to measure. And when this question is translated in Swahili is watu humfikiri vibaya mtu mwenye matumizi mabaya ya pombe. So kumfikiri vibaya in our local context or in Swahili, it is not direct. So we need that direct question that will be able to measure this alcohol problem. So it needs to be back translated from, do people think less, to, do people look down on somebody who has alcohol-related problems? Now, looking down is very straightforward, and people can answer it directly. Similar in Swahili, it means watu kumdharau. So kumdharau for us is very direct, and you get the direct answers. And at the end of the day, we need a new or adapted scale because we want to have valid and reliable measure according to the local context and setting. So there are different stages to develop a scale. The first is to identify what is to be measured. And this can be done through literature search and expert opinion to be able to familiarize ourselves with what is available and what is not available. And through that, we can further go to generating and adapting an item pool. And this, through understanding what is available or what is needed, we'll be able to use existing validator tool or adapt an existing or create a new one. Then later we'll go to translate or back translate, as I said with the example of alcohol-related problem. So after you back translate and getting to know that, okay, people with, if I say that people think less is not direct or is not culturally appropriate. So by back translating is people looking down will ensure culturally appropriate translation and also give us enough evidence of what is being measured. The other step is pre-testing and item pool. So this one requires a small sample in order to be able to revise or remove the confusing item. Further, we'll move to assessing validity and reliability. Validity is truth. Does the tool actually measure what you intend to measure? And reliability is more about reproducibility. Can we get the same results over and over and over again over the same settings, even though the population is different? So this one will help us to confirm if the tool is working scientifically. Then lastly is about refining. So in this stage, we'll have cultural appropriate, accurate, and scientifically sound tool. Then about measurement or forming a valid tool, there are different concepts measurement, and this is according to measurement theory. There are various concepts, but today we are going to discuss on two key concepts, that is validity and reliability. As I said earlier, validity is about truth. Does the construct actually measure what is intended to be measured? And reliability is reproducibility. Is the measurement consistent? Like, does it reproduce the same reading in the same setting? So these two key concepts, that is validity and reliability, are essential for quality measurement. Though reliability is necessary but not sufficient for validity. In order to get that quality or standard measurement, we need valid response, whereby reliability is necessary for validity, but by itself, reliability is not sufficient for validity. So this takes us to types of validity. There are actually 5 types of validity. We have content validity. This one ensures that the questions that are being made in a tool are actually there to present what is being asked. Do they make sense? Do they give us the answers that we need? And in this stage, it's more about qualitative method, whereby focus group discussion among stakeholders such as patients, healthcare workers, and even ministers of health are being assessed or are being asked questions in order to give the real meaning of the constructs that we need, and actually the tool that we are going to come up with after the interview. So the second step or the second type is construct validity, and this one is aiming to confirm the theoretical relationship the variable holds statistically, and this can be done through factor analysis. We're going to discuss on it later. And the third validity is criterion-related validity or concurrent validity. This one compares the new tool to the gold standard or the reference to assess whether scores related to the established measure. Like we are talking about PHQ-9, we use PHQ-9 in research, but clinically to diagnose depression, we use DSM-5. So does PHQ-9, the questions that are listed in PHQ-9 related to DSM-5 in identifying people with depression? So that is about criterion-related validity. The fourth validity is response validity. And this one examines how people interpret questions. It's to understand the reasoning of people. The fifth is validity. This is more like content validity, and it can be grouped into 3. We have test content, whereby does the scale or measure or the tool measure what is being supposed to be measured. Or we have the other one is response process, and this one measures understanding, just as I said in response validity. And then consequence of testing. This ensures that this tool is appropriate for research measures, because at the end of the day, this tool will be able to identify those particular keys or constructs that will be can also be identified clinically by using gold standard tools. So I welcome Derrick to continue.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Derrick Kimaro, and I'll be taking you through reliability. As Doreen has previously introduced, with reliability, we are mainly looking at internal consistency. When developing a tool or when adapting a tool, we want the tool to be consistent irrespective of the environment currently being implemented. So the two key aspects we look at when it comes to reliability, the first one is internal reliability, which is internal consistency within the tool itself. In this case, we mainly look at the items or the specific questions within the tool. When developing a tool and adapting, we want the specific questions to be highly consistent with each other, meaning if they are measuring depression severity, as in the case for the PHQ-9, you want all the questions to actually be measuring the respective item and not to be deviating, whether depending on the translation or adaptation. And this is usually validated through statistics such as the Cronbach alpha or coefficient omega, where we aim for scores closer to 1, which directly indicate that the questions themselves have a high internal consistency within themselves when measuring the specific factor. But caution should be made with regards to high values of Cronbach alpha or coefficient measures, as this might be directly inflated by questionnaires that have a lot of redundant questions that are closely related to each other, which might further burden the patient or affect implementation. Because the biggest issue with psychometrics or when developing a tool is that we want the participant to be fully engaged with the new or developed measure. The other technique we use to check for internal consistency is the split half method. With regards, let's say, to a tool that has been developed that has 10 specific items or 15 or 20, this test is split into two or divided into two. If the questionnaire has 20 questions, it may be split into the first half with 10 questions. Go back, please. Yes. It may be split into two halves, the first one with 10 and the other one with 10. A good tool should be internally consistent, meaning if the participant were to do the first half of the tool and then to be summed up, you expect that the scores will be internally consistent or very similar in both implementations, as we can see in the first example with test A and test B. We see that similar results have been seen as are very consistent among all the participants. While in contrast, an implementation that has no internal consistency, we might see a slight or major deviation in the test scores on either halves. Go to the next slide, please. Yes, the second concept to look at is external reliability, which in this case simply looks at the test and retest or the alternate forms. This simply refers to the fact that if the test were to be repeated on the same participant or translated or implemented in different forms, it will still yield similar or identical results to the initial implementation. As in the case where if a test is implemented 2 weeks after the first attempt, we usually anticipate that the patient's initial condition has not changed. So we anticipate that if a tool is reliable, there will be a consistent score throughout. And statistical measures usually used, depending on the type of tool, if as a more dependent or continuous measure, we might use an intra-class coefficient or ICC for continuous measure, or a kappa when we're dealing with more categorical, or in the cases where we know that a patient has a disease or does not have a disease, we'll use a coefficient, we use a kappa as a direct measure, while ICC will be used for measures that are usually diagnosed through the score itself. And these are both used in order to assess the concordance of the two attempts of the same test on the same participant. When we refer to alternate forms, we simply refer to things like a long or short version of the same tool being implemented on a participant, or an in-person versus an over-the-phone call implementation of the same question. As in this case, maybe the PHQ-9. We do not anticipate that a PHQ-9 being implemented in person would yield different results when it's implemented over the phone. As with alternate forms, this might also encompass concepts like translations of the same tool, maybe translation from English to Kiswahili. If a tool is externally reliable, we anticipate that the results will not differ significantly. Go to the next slide, please. So, a few key terms I would like everyone to be familiar with as we continue to discuss further factor analysis and core development are regarding the PHQ-9, for example, is the factor. A factor simply refers to a hidden construct the tool aims to assess, which in this case, with the PHQ-9, this is usually depression severity. And the items themselves refers to the specific questions, which in this case are usually 9 developed questions, which are usually conducted or answered by participants in order to assess their depression severity. And these questions are usually scored using indicators, which indicate the severity level based on the frequency. For example, in the PHQ-9, we'll have things like not at all or regularly and so on. These usually indicate how severe the specific item, indicator item, such as little interest or pleasure in doing things, is, as we assume that these indicators are direct measures of the factor in question. Lastly, we look at loading. Loading simply refers to the strength of the relationship between the indicated or the items themselves with the factor being in question. We do not want questions that do not relate well to the depression severity. For example, in this case, since we're looking at depression, things like little interest or little pleasure in doing things have a high value or high loading value with regards to depression severity, while you're having joy or simply having fun have a different opposite measure. But in each case, the loading itself simply directly implies that there's a strong association between the item in question and the factor being introduced or asked for by the tool itself. Go to the next slide. So, in factor analysis during scale development, we usually aim to determine how many underlying constants or latent variables are hidden within a set item or certain number of questions. For example, there are 2 scenarios I'd like everyone to think about when we're looking at exploratory factor analysis and confirmatory factor analysis. When you basically do not have an idea when you're trying to develop a new tool, we usually do not have strong theories or we do not have a strong direct association that we're certain of that this measure or this factors and these items or questions are directly related. So in this case, we'll perform an exploratory factor analysis in order to determine the constructs the specific items fit in relation to the factor being investigated. In this case, we might start out with questions and we'll see how well they actually fit in to the factor being observed, such as depression severity. But in the cases where we're already more certain and the theory has already been laid, meaning through expert consultation or through adaptation of the said tool, the theory is usually existent and the test has a predefined factor structure. So we are basically trying to evaluate how well this new mod or this structure that has been adapted from one setting to another fits with regards to a new population. And in this case, we usually perform a confirmatory factor analysis in order to confirm and see how well these new this implementation or this adaptation of the theory fits into the new population or the new subset data. Continue. So, with regards to factor analysis, there's usually no stringent rule, but there are specific guidelines that usually help to guide us, such as the factor structure. We usually aim such that factors usually have the decent or sufficient number of items with good loading. We do not want to measure depression or depression severity with only 2 or 1 question because it may not be adequately sufficient in measuring. And when we do have multiple items, preferably more than 3 or more items, we usually prefer that the items themselves have a strong loading or strong association, as previously mentioned. And when it comes to item scaling, this is usually the scoring or the response levels usually presented with the items themselves. Through scale development or scale design, we usually determine a response level. Ideally, we aim for anywhere from 5 to above, but it's not stringent in that we want it to be based on the theory itself. Because having a lot of irrelevant responses might actually water down the tool's effectiveness. But having a sufficient number of responses will actually reduce the number of items required in order to assess the reliability of the tool itself. As mentioned, with scale design, we usually choose the number of levels or response levels and expected constructs by the theory itself, meaning you do not want to measure redundant things that do not relate to the factor or the problem at hand. And we use things like taxonometric analysis in order to determine how to define the measurement scale. Because in conditions such as depression, it's usually not categorical in the sense that you have depression or not. It's usually a spectrum of the disease condition, meaning it's a severity along a big spectrum. So you cannot purely define depression through having depression, not having depression. And this is usually established through taxonometric analysis, which will help us identify how the factor itself in the tool fits in to our population. And in this case, how will it actually be assessed or presented? So the last part we'll cover is regarding the power and sample size. When it comes to psychometric, we usually do not have a fixed rule, but we have guidelines that we aim for, as these will actually ensure the validity of our statistics and the science being performed. For example, when we're looking at the internal consistency using Kronberg alpha, we usually aim for having a sufficient number of participants, anywhere from 100 or more participants. But if this is not available, then you can actually scale the number of participants using 7 times the number of questions in the tool currently being developed. Other literatures might actually suggest that for basic psychometric analysis, which basically encompasses everything from validity and reliability, we usually aim for having participants anywhere from 200 or more. While in issues relating to factor analysis or development of a specific tool, usually larger sample sizes are preferred because the concept is poorly understood and might need proper justification and multiple implementations in order to actually validate. So large sample sizes are usually preferred. But this is not fixed with regards to the fact that if the factors are well usually known, as in the case for cultural adaptations, the constructs and factors themselves are usually already known. So it's a case of merely adapting them to the specific or a new population. In such cases, sample sizes ranging from anywhere to 100 to 200 may be acceptable. But this must be ensured by the fact that the factors themselves must have sufficient loading, meaning that they are strongly associated to the construct that they're trying to measure. And each factor should have a sufficient number of indicators or questions themselves that are relating to the factor being investigated. In such scenarios, we may not need large samples, but the one thing that we should observe with regards to psychometrics is that replication or validation through splitting or independent samples, meaning redoing the test within the same sample by splitting it in half. For example, if we have 300 participants, you may perform the first analysis in the first 150, then validate it with a secondary sample of 150, thus utilizing the whole 300. Or re-implementing this through an independent sample in order to test and verify the results. So in such cases, replication is usually advised if the population actually allows for. So I guess that's our references, and I think this presentation isn't basically the work we're trying to do, but this is the first step in order to assess our understanding of core development before we actually develop an SAP. So I welcome any inputs and feedback and a more constructive discussion in order to help us better understand how psychometric works and how we might actually better implement it in our analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Doreen. This was a great presentation. Sets up the ground for a lot of people that want to do psychometrics work overall. If I can start with a question, you touched on the topic that it's not directly the work itself that you're going to do. We're going to work on the SAP next. Can you talk about some of about the project that you're going to implement this knowledge, that you're going to develop the SAP, and what you're aiming to do on this for your study case?
Okay. In this case, we're actually looking at psychometric validation for an implementation that is currently being done in Moi Editorate in Kenya. The sample size and the data has already been collected. And it's just waiting for us to actually perform the psychometric analysis. And the tools in hand we have them are the GAD-7, the PHQ-9, and the assist tools, which I believe most of us are usually already familiar, but these have been adapted and are being adapted for the East African population. So this is what this study actually aims to achieve.
I see.
Okay.
That's nice.
Mm. Okay.
And so you are going to come in by developing the SAP and doing the analysis itself, or are you going to be more on the theoretical side? And the question is, of course, for
Uh,
both of you.
oh, okay. We actually
Okay.
aim on, or should I let Doreen answer?
Okay, so we actually aim to continue with the analysis on psychometric validation. So this is just, as Derek said, this is the first step of understanding what psychometric validation is. Then after that, we are going to use the data that is already collected at Kenya, Moi, and then do the psychometric analysis on that data. Yeah.
Nice, nice. All right. Thank you. Thank you for explaining. And I can see that you put a lot of work on this, on understanding the core of the theory there. The next steps are the getting to the analysis. And I invite you to come back and present that analysis and show your process through it. I'm sure that folks would also love to listen and see what your experience has been like. But I wanted to open the room for other questions as well. If folks have any questions or they are going through the same process in other projects, maybe that's a good opportunity to share.